Good morning, everybody. This is Mr. Bob again. Time for our reading with Mr. Bob in our book, C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Again, as we start this morning, this is something to think about. As we have more time available now, and it looks like we're not going to be able to start school in session at the Colonel Wright Elementary in the actual building until at least May. I know that your teachers will be getting some work to you here in the next week or so, if not sooner. But even so, it's one of the things that's important when you have all this time that you take advantage of that. And one of those things is right now, I imagine many of your moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas, whoever else is with you taking care of you, might be feeling a little bit of stress. So to do whatever you can to help them and to ask them how you might help. One suggestion I know almost every parent would tell you is, yes, keep your room clean. Now, I was once 8 years old too, and 9 years old, and 10 years old, and 11 years old, and 12 years old, and that was something my mom was always asking me to do, was to keep my room clean. So that's something that you might consider, is helping to pick up your room and maybe keep up the living room or the family area picked up so that it doesn't get so cluttered that people get irritated. So anyway, just something to think about. Always ask your mom and dad first. It's always important that they know that you're doing what they need you to do. Anyway, chapter 10, the spell begins to break. Now we must go back to Mr. and Mrs. Beaver and the other three children. As soon as Mr. Beaver said, "There's no time to lose," everyone began bundling themselves into coats, except Mrs. Beaver, who started picking up sacks and laying them on the table and said, "Now, Mr. Beaver, just reach down that ham. And here's a packet of tea, and there's sugar and some matches. And if someone will get 2 or 3 loaves out of the crock over there in the corner." "What are you doing, Mrs. Beaver?" exclaimed Susan. "Packing a load for each of us, dearie," said Mrs. Beaver very coolly. "You didn't think we'd set out on a journey without anything to eat, did you?" "Oh, but we haven't had time," said Susan, buttoning the collar of her coat. "She may be here any minute." "That's what I say," chimed in Mr. Beaver. "Get along with you all," said his wife. "Think it over, Mr. Beaver. She can't be here for a quarter hour at least." "But don't we want as big a head start as we can get," said Peter, "if we're to reach the stone table before her?" "You've got to remember that, Mrs. Beaver," said Susan. "As soon as she has looked in here and finds we're gone, she'll be off at top speed." "That she will," said Mrs. Beaver, "but we can't get there before her whatever we do, for she'll be on a sledge and we'll be walking." Then we have no hope," said Susan. "Now, don't get fussing, there's a dear," said Mrs. Beaver. "Just get half a dozen clean handkerchiefs out of the drawer. Of course, we've got a hope. We can't get there before her, but we can keep under cover and go by way she won't expect, and perhaps we'll get through." "That's true enough, Mrs. Beaver," said her husband, "but it's time we were out of this." "And don't you start fussing either, Mr. Beaver," said his wife. "There, that's better. That's 5 loads, the smallest for the smallest. That's you, my dear," she added, looking at Lucy. "Oh, do, please come on," said Lucy. "Well, I'm nearly ready now," answered Mrs. Beaver at last, allowing her husband to help her into her snow boots. "I suppose the sewing machine's too heavy to bring." "Yes, it is," said Mr. Beaver. "A great deal too heavy. And you don't think we'll be able to use it while you're on the run, I suppose?" "I can't abide the thought of that witch fiddling with it," said Mrs. Beaver, "and breaking it or stealing it, or as likely as not." "Oh, please, please, please do hurry," said the 3 children. And so, at last, they all got outside, and Mr. Beaver locked the door. "It'll delay her a bit," he said. And they set off, all carrying their loads over their shoulders. The snow had stopped, and the moon had come out when they began their journey. They went in single file, first Mr. Beaver, then Lucy, then Peter, then Susan, and Mrs. Beaver last of all. Mr. Beaver led them across the dam and onto the right bank of the river, and then along a very short sort of path, among the trees right down the river bank. The sides of the valley, shining in the moonlight, towered up far above them on the other hand. "Best keep down here as much as possible," he said. "She'll have to keep to the top, for you wouldn't bring a sledge down here." it would have been a pretty enough scene to look at through the window of a comfortable armchair. And even as things were, Lucy enjoyed it at first. But as they were walking and walking and walking, and as the sack she was carrying felt heavier and heavier, she began to wonder how she was going to keep up at all. And she stopped looking at the dazzling brightness of the frozen river with all its waterfalls of ice, and at the white masses of the treetops and the great glaring moon, and the countless stars, and could only watch the short little legs of Mr. Beaver going pad, pad, pad through the snow in front of her, as if they were never going to stop. Then the moon disappeared, and the moon began to fall once more, or the snow began to fall once more, and at last Lucy was so tired that she almost fell asleep, and was walking at the same time, when suddenly she found that Mr. Beaver had turned away from the riverbank to the right, and was leading them steeply uphill into the very thickest bushes. And then she came fully awake as she found that Mr. Beaver was just vanishing into a little hole in the bank, which had been almost hidden under the bushes, until you're quite on top of it. In fact, by the time she realized what was happening, only his short, flat tail was showing. Lucy immediately stooped down and crawled in after him. Then she heard noises of scrambling and puffing and panting behind her, and in a moment all five were inside. "Wherever is this?" said Peter's voice, sounding tired and pale in the darkness. "I hope you know what I mean by a voice sounding pale. It's an old hiding place for beavers in bad times," said Mr. Beaver, "and a great secret. It's not much of a place, but we must get a few hours' sleep. If you hadn't been all in such a plaguey fuss when we were starting, I'd brought some pillows," said Mrs. Beaver. It wasn't such a nice cave as Mr. Tumnus's, Lucy thought, just a hole in the ground, but it was dry and earthy. It was very small, and so that they all lay down, they were all a bundle of clothes together, and what with that, and being warmed by their long walk, they were really quite snug. If only the floor of the cave had been a little smoother. I'm having a trouble, if you've noticed, with my camera wanting to go in and out of focus. I'm not really sure why, but we'll see if we can fix that. Hopefully that's now. It's wanting to cause problems today, I'm afraid. Let me see if I can't. There. Maybe that will fix it. Anyway. Then Mrs. Beaver handed out around in the dark a little flask out of which everyone drank something. It made one cough and sputter a little, and it stung the throat, but it also made you feel deliciously warm after you'd swallowed it, and everyone went straight to sleep. It seemed to Lucy only the next minute, though it really was hours and hours later, when she woke up feeling a little cold and dreadfully stiff, and thinking how she would like a hot bath. Then she felt a long set of whiskers tickling her cheek, and saw the gold daylight coming through the mouth of the cave. Immediately after that she was very wide awake indeed, and so was everyone else. In fact, they were all sitting up with their mouths and eyes wide open and listening to a sound which was the very sound they had all been thinking of, and sometimes imagining they heard during their walk last night. It was the sound of jingling bells. Now, lest you think it might be the witch coming to find them, remember in our previous story the witch had told the dwarf to set her sledge without bells. So who do you think this could be? Mr. Beaver was out of the cave like a flash in a moment he heard it. Perhaps you think, as Lucy thought for a moment, that this is a very silly thing to do, but it was really a very sensible one. He knew he would scramble to the top of the bank among bushes and brambles without being seen, and he wanted above all things to see which way the witches' sledges went. The others all sat in the cave waiting and wondering. They waited nearly 5 minutes. Then they heard something that frightened them very much. They heard voices. "Oh," thought Lucy, "he's been seen. She's caught him." Great was their surprise when a little later they heard Mr. Beaver's voice calling to them from just outside the cave. "It's all right," he was shouting. "Come on, come out, Mrs. Beaver. Come out, sons and daughters of Adam. It's all right. It isn't her." This was bad grammar, of course, but that is how beavers talk when they get excited, I suppose. I mean, in Narnia, in our world, they usually don't talk at all. But Mrs. Beaver and the children came bundling out of the cave, all blinking in the daylight, with earth all over them, and looking very frosty, and unbrushed and uncombed, and with the sleep still in their eyes. "Come on," cried Mr. Beaver, who was almost dancing with delight. "Come and see. This is a nasty knock for the witch. This looks as if her power is already starting to crumble." "What do you mean, Mr. Beaver?" panted Peter, as they were all scrambled up the steep bank of the valley together. "Didn't I tell you," answered Mr. Beaver, "that she made it always winter and never Christmas? Didn't I tell you? Well, just come and see." And then they were all on the top and did see. It was the sledge, and it was reindeer with bells on their harness, but they were far bigger than the witch's reindeer, and they were not white but brown. And on the sledge sat a person whom everyone knew the moment they set their eyes on him. It was a huge man in a bright red robe, bright as holly berries, with a hood that had fur inside it, and a great white beard that fell like foamy waterfall over his chest. Who do you suppose it could be? Everyone knew him, because though you see people of the sort only in Narnia, you see pictures of them and hear them talked about even in our world, the world on this side of the wardrobe door. But when you really see them in Narnia, it is rather different. Some of the pictures of Father Christmas, who you might call Santa Claus, in our world make him look only funny and jolly, and he is that. But now that the children actually stood looking at him, they didn't find it quite that way at all. He was so big and so glad and so real that they all became quite still. They felt very glad, but also a bit solemn. "I've come at last," said he. "She has kept me out for a long time, but I have got in at last. Aslan is on the move. The witch's magic is weakening." And Lucy felt running through her that deep shiver of gladness, which you only get if you are being solemn and still. "And now," said Father Christmas, "for your presents. There is a new and better sewing machine for you, Mrs. Beaver. I will drop it in your house as I pass." "If you please," said Mrs. Beaver, making a curtsy. "It's all locked up." "Locks and bolts make no difference to me," said Father Christmas. "And as for you, Mr. Beaver, when you get home you will find that your dam finished and mended, and all the leaks stopped, and a new sluice gate fitted." Mr. Beaver was so pleased that he opened his mouth very wide, then found he couldn't say anything at all. "Peter, Adam's son," said Father Christmas. "Here, sir," said Peter. "These are your presents," was the answer. "And they are tools, not toys. The time to use them is perhaps near at hand. Bear them well." With these words he handed to Peter a shield and a sword. The shield was the color of silver, and across it ramped a red lion, as bright as a ripe strawberry at the moment when you pick it. The hilt of the sword was of gold, and it had a sheath and a sword belt and everything it needed, and it was just the right size and weight for Peter to use. Peter was silent and solemn as he received these gifts, for he felt they were a very serious kind of present. And indeed they were a very serious kind of present. And it seems difficult to think of a boy of Peter's age to get a sword and a shield. But you have to remember there are times, and we are one of them right now, that life in this world can be difficult to live in. And sometimes you have to be prepared. And that's one of the reasons why we are staying home instead of being at school. There's an illness going around, and it's important that we don't share that illness. And so in serious times, we have to take measures which we'd rather not have to take. And in this case, that's what we're doing right now. We are, as a society, as a country, and really the entire world is doing this, staying home so we do not pass on this illness, especially to people that might be susceptible to bad illnesses. So Peter has been given a very serious tool to use for very serious times. "Susan, Eve's daughter," said Father Christmas, "these are for you." And he handed her a bow and a quiver full of arrows and a little ivory horn. You must use the bow only in great need, he said, for I do not mean you to fight in the battle. It does not easily miss, and when you put this horn to your lips and blow it then, wherever you are, I think help of some kind will find you. Last of all, he said, Lucy, Eve's daughter. Lucy, come forward. He gave her a little bottle of what looked like glass, but people afterwards said that it was made of diamond, and a small dagger. In this bottle, he said, there is a cordial made of the juice of one of the fire flowers that grow in the mountains of the sun. If you or any of your friends is hurt, a few drops of this will restore them. And the dagger is to defend yourself in great need, for you are also not to be in the battle. Why, sir, said Lucy, I don't know, but I think I could be brave enough. That is not the point. But battles are ugly at these times, and now he suddenly looked less grave. Here is something for you, for the moment for you all. And he brought out, I suppose, from the big bag at his back, but nobody quite saw him do it, a large tray containing 5 cups and saucers, a bowl of lump sugar, a jug of cream, and a big teapot, all sizzling and piping hot. He was Father Christmas, after all. Then he cried out, Merry Christmas, long live the true king. And he cracked his whip, and he and the reindeer and the sledge and all were out of sight before anyone realized that they had started. Peter had just drawn his sword out of the sheath and was showing to Mr. Beaver, when Mrs. Beaver said, Now then, don't stand talking here till the tea's got cold, just like men. Come on, have help, carry the tray down, and we'll have breakfast. What a mercy, I thought of bringing the bread knife. So down the steep bank they went, and back to the cave, and Mr. Beaver cut out some of the bread and ham into sandwiches, and Mrs. Beaver poured out the tea, and everyone enjoyed themselves. But long before they had finished enjoying themselves, Mr. Beaver said, Time to be moving on now. And that is the finish of chapter 10. Chapter 11 is a very exciting chapter. It's entitled Aslan is Nearer. I hope you enjoyed our story today. Continue to watch, continue to do the work that you have, that you get from your teachers, and continue to keep up your skills. We'll see you again later. This is Mr. Bob. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.